James Duane, in his book entitled You Have the Right to Remain Innocent, offers sage advice on how to properly act if one is prosecuted by the police. Two scenarios from the book about innocent people whose circumstances changed once they spoke to the police were Eddie Lowry and Earl Ruffin. Eddie Lowry was a 22-year-old soldier in Kansas that was interrogated for an entire day about a rape and a murder he never committed. After hours of interrogation, he kept prolonging his story in detail and then gave a detailed confession because he was naive about his rights and he didn't know any way out of it. He just wanted to tell the police what they wanted to hear. The second scenario was the most prominent one in the book. It was the story of Earl Ruffin. Earl Ruffin was an innocent man who spent more than 20 years in prison for a rape he didn't commit. Then he turned himself in just to answer questions, but the police altered his statement and the alibi. The officer questioning him brought to the trial typed up notes that became more important than the witnesses. However, fortunately for Earl Ruffin, DNA evidence freed him from his time in prison, but he was wrongly convicted because the police said something they remember even if it was not the truth. James Duane offers a lot of advice against speaking to the police because he states that it is dangerous to tell the police any information. So one reason that he explains is that one might make mistakes explaining the situation, and that causes to interpret the situation as lies, or the statement as lies. He explains that what the person needs to do if the police finds them in a compromising position is just state their name and whether they have some lawful reason for their curious presence at the moment. Another reason one should not talk to the police is that the officer might misremember what they say much later after talking to them. Duane mentions that police officers are only human and they remember what they can, and they don't want to change their statements because they don't want to be wrong. This is called confirmation bias. Now, another reason is that victims might be tricked into saying the wrong things because the police are omitting important information or told them lies. Duane says that many cops make false promises to victims, especially young ones, saying that they have a long life ahead of them, even though the police have already decided they are guilty. Also, many victims were told lies in order to get a confession out of them. One of the most important reasons Duane mentions is the fact that any statement and the possibility of having witnesses could be turned around to make them appear guilty. Police officers use trick in order to convict people. They omit pronouns and information when explaining the case to the defendant, and then when the victim answers, they ask questions only the real killer would have known. When asked to speak to the police, James Duane promptly states to plead the Sixth Amendment, not the Fifth. He tells his readers in a chapter dedicated to pleading the Sixth Amendment that the Fifth Amendment can be used as a form of self-incrimination. He uses the case of Salinas v. Texas as an example, where Salinas was advised to remain silent, causing the Supreme Court to take his silence as a confession. The Sixth Amendment gives defendants the right to legal counsel, which means the right to a lawyer. It is best to state, "I want a lawyer" in an affirming tone rather than a respectful way, because the police might say in a court of law that they did not specifically ask for a lawyer. Pleading the Fifth has now been a form of incrimination because the prosecutor may persuade the judge and jury that that was a form of evidence against the defendant. I personally think that the author's advice was very helpful and insightful into the legal system. He simply tries to advise people on how to protect themselves and their children if they ever find themselves in a compromising situation. We constantly hear the phrase, "you have the right to remain silent," but we haven't realized that remaining silent might put one in deeper waters. The phrase should be, "you have a right to ask for legal counsel." Fortunately, I nor someone I know has experience speaking to the police. However, I will still advise everyone around me to read this book. This book has taught me that the American system, while corrupt, is still changing, and it is important to know how to deal when faced with an issue.